welcome to the Bossman Show with John Beckler.
Now we're joined by Big Ten reporter, also Ohio State, specialized in Ohio State. Got a lot of good articles out there for you guys on the recruiting things with Ohio State, all things OSU. From ESPN.com, it's Austin Ward. Austin, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing pretty well, man. It's good to hear from you.
Yes, indeed. I already talked about the Buckeyes, man. They're very intriguing to me. You know, I'm down here in the South, and I see the SEC a lot, but Urban Meyer was down here, and now he's up in the Big Ten doing big things. The Buckeyes went 38-3 in his 3 years at OSU, and he's bringing the SEC way and the speed up there with the recruiting and everything like that. So with the top 5 recruiting class that's coming in, being in the Big Ten the way he has been, you see the Buckeyes continuing to be in the class of the Big Ten, even though Jim Harbaugh has made a splash and joined the Michigan Wolverines.
Yeah, really since Urban Meyer arrived in Columbus, it's changed the nature of the Big Ten. I think it was still the conference took some punches in September of last year. They were a laughingstock for a couple of weeks, but I think he has actually raised the level of play not just at Ohio State, but across the conference. You referenced Jim Harbaugh. That's certainly going to be a big boost for Michigan in that rivalry with Ohio State. But I think if you look at what Mark D'Antonio has done at Michigan State over the last 5-6 years, what James Franklin, somebody else that people in the Southeast there are very familiar with from his time at Vanderbilt, he is making a big splash recruiting at Penn State. They had a little bit maybe better season than some people thought, won a bowl game last year. Rutgers and Maryland, both in that East, were better than people thought. I think the Big Ten is on the way back, and is going to be maybe more competition for the SEC and Pac-12 moving forward. But Urban Meyer is carrying that flag for the league. Of course, they just won a national championship. But one thing that he has brought, I think, that is helping more than just Ohio State, is pointing out to these teams that you have to go get some talent from Georgia, from Florida. They got Von Bell from that area outside of Chattanooga. Go to Texas. Go to Louisiana. You can't just get by anymore trying to recruit the Midwest, and you also have to treat it as a 12-month process. No handshake agreements to not recruit committed players, things like that. You have to be ruthless and on the recruiting trail as much as you possibly can be. That's paid dividend for the Buckeyes, but it's also challenged the rest of the league to keep up, because if they don't take this approach, Urban Meyer is not going to slow down. He's already got one national title and a Big Ten championship and a bunch of trophies in his office, and he will continue to chase more if you're not up to the task.
Well, Austin, speaking of the recruiting and all the things that you just mentioned, it being 24 hours a day, 365, it's a gig that you got to be up on nowadays. What are your thoughts on Jim Harbaugh, and how is he going to adapt when he comes into Michigan, his recruiting classes? Is he going to, recruit down south, as you indicated, is kind of a must at this point for the Big Ten? And what are some of the recruiting battles that you kind of are looking for so far on the 2016 trail with Harbaugh in the mix for some of the players that Meyer has targeted?
Well, the big thing for Jim Harbaugh, as you mentioned, I think he will expand the reach. It wasn't that Brady Hoke was a bad recruiter. Michigan has so much to sell that it will always be able to go out and really get the kind of prospects that it wants and is used to, top 15 type classes. In some ways, it was unfortunate for Harbaugh in Michigan that he was their guy all along, and the longer they waited for him, they knew that they were going to have to sacrifice some work for the 2015 class, that they were going to be way behind. They were willing to make that sacrifice because they knew that Harbaugh would be able to go out and attack the 2016 class. I think that the main area, not to dive into too many specific recruits, but if you look at this Mike Weber situation that popped up a week ago at the Wire, that's a popular, that's a school that Michigan has always owned. It's in Detroit. As a former player who helps run that program, Ohio State has gone in there for the last 2 years and got the best player from Cass Tech. Cornerback Damon Webb 2 years ago, Mike Weber last week. It was somewhat controversial with what happened with the running backs coach at Ohio State leaving the next day, but that's going to be an area where Jim Harbaugh has to address closing down the borders. It's going to be enough with Michigan State on the rise. He's going to have to contend with Mark D'Antonio again. But if Urban Meyer is able to come into Michigan and take the top one or two players from his state, that's going to be a big problem in terms of rebuilding. So I think more than just specific players, because Harbaugh proved he almost flipped Weber at the end. He stole a quarterback recruit for this class away from Texas in the last month. He's not afraid to compete. He can go sell the NFL to people. He can point to what he did at Stanford, turning them around and helping turn a bunch of those prospects into NFL players. And Harbaugh's going to have some great success there, but the first thing he has to do is get back to closing down that border and not letting Urban Meyer in, because that battle itself just between those two is going to be nonstop. And if they don't get those players that are close by, Urban Meyer's going to make it a lot more difficult for him in that rivalry. So if you look at it, they're going to go head-to-head a bunch. Harbaugh's going to have to come to Ohio and pluck some players out. There's a bunch of famous examples of Michigan doing so. But at this point, I would say it's not so much about specific players for 2016 as maybe areas being important to Jim Harbaugh, and then reclaiming some property that Urban Meyer has taken away.
Austin, two-parter for you here. What will Ohio State hiring Tony Alford, Notre Dame's recruiting coordinator and running backs coach, help with recruiting? And also, according to Rivals.com, the Buckeyes came in with a number 9th ranked class 2015. Who are some players out of this class that you think will be playing, making an impact on the field this upcoming season?
Alford, I think the whole situation was kind of interesting the way it played out, guys. I mean, people were talking about, how unfortunate it was for Mike Weber on Thursday, the day after he signed, to lose Stan Drayton, the running backs coach, who he thought he was going to play for. He goes to join the Bears, and people kind of lobbed accusations of shadiness and how unfair it was. And then, lo and behold, 2 days later, at another program, another prestigious program, Notre Dame, their recruiting coordinator, somebody's involved with basically the entire class, is leaving for another job. That's the way college football works. It's sad for the kids, but with the way the calendar's set up, the way that people want to live their lives professionally, coaches are always going to leave. And I think in this circumstance, it addresses the Weber situation because Tony Alford had a relationship with the kid. He knew him before. He's had great success recruiting for the Irish the last few years. I think he fills a lot of needs. He's got a pre-existing relationship with Urban Meyer. He knows running backs, played the position. So he checks a lot of boxes for Ohio State. Plus, the fact that they were able to move so quickly not only could help maybe mend some fences that they had, hurt feelings with Weber and maybe even a couple other players that Drayton may have recruited, but it also allows them to move on and get into this 16 class with somebody who also knows a lot of the same targets that they were going to have. And knows the Midwest and knows the system, all those sorts of things. So I think that it was a great hire for Ohio State, especially that it only took 48 hours to identify him after he left. But and then you asked, this 15 class for Ohio State, who could we maybe see?
Yes.
I think mostly it's going to be about this defensive line class for Ohio State. That was the one position, if you're looking at the reigning national champions, where they hit hard, where they're losing Michael Bennett at defensive tackle and Steve Miller at defensive end. And if you stretch it back even further, even though Noah Spence missed all of the 2014 season, you kind of have to factor in replacing him because he was somebody, a starter and all-conference performer before his suspension. So kind of three areas, three players that are missing moving forward, and so that's one position that doesn't have that much depth, but a guy, elite prospect at defensive end, and early enrollee as well, Deshaun Cornell. He's 6'2", 260, can really move off the edge as a pass rusher. They plucked him out of Minnesota, which isn't a great recruiting hotbed for Ohio State traditionally, but he was very highly touted. They get him in, he's going to be able to go through spring practice. That's the kind of name I think that you'll have to look out for. I don't know that he is going to be what Joey Bosa did 2 years ago as a true freshman. I don't know how common that is to expect from somebody, but he's got that same kind of athleticism. They're still going to have Bosa, of course, for one more season at least, and that does take some pressure off somebody at the other end. But he would be definitely somebody to look out for. Joshua Albi, another player that I mentioned from Michigan, he's a defensive tackle. Harbaugh made a push for him. They wasn't able to keep him within state, 6'5", 295. He's somebody maybe who could fill that void of Michael Bennett. He's a potential first or second round draft pick, Bennett, and an invaluable leader. They need a couple of these guys in the trenches to come in and contribute early if they're going to keep up this pace. It's the one position where you could look and say they're not as strong as they were in 2014, Ohio State, but virtually everywhere else, the offensive line has 4 guys back. Ezekiel Elliott is back at running back. He's going to be a Heisman favorite. The receivers, 6 of the top 7 targets are back. Both safeties, a corner, all 3 linebackers. Really, everywhere else, Ohio State is so loaded that this would be the one position where they've got some availability, some opportunity for young guys to step in, and they will need them to. And I intentionally skipped the quarterbacks because that is an entirely different matter, and something that will take a lot longer to sort out when you have 3 decorated, trophy-winning quarterbacks coming back. It's really an unprecedented situation, and I tend to leave it out there on its own because it's so unique. You can't even really factor it in with the way you normally would other positions.
Well, Austin, just to switch it up to the quarterbacks for the Buckeyes, they've added Torrance Gibson, Joe Burrow to go along with Miller, Barrett, Jones. Which of the original 3 ends up starting at quarterback? And do you think, Gibson, Burrow, redshirt? And, just the final, add-on to that question would be, in hindsight, do you think that Cardale Jones, should have went and turned pro with it looking more and more like Miller coming back for another season?
I think, it would have been hard for me if I was in Cardale Jones' situation and I had just played 3 games, and it would be hard to envision my stock getting higher. And by the way, he's as old as Braxton Miller because he also went to a military school and redshirted for Ohio State, trying to put some distance between himself and Miller in their recruiting to go way back. I would have probably been very tempted to leave. I can understand why Jones would elect to come back if he thinks that he has a great inside track to the starting job, which I believe that he does. He can improve on being a 3rd or 4th rounder who GMs and pro scouts don't have much tape on, and he was really going to be picked apart in that process. I can understand that. The difficulty would be if you have this 3-way battle between Miller, Barrett, and Jones, there's really no guarantee, which is why I think when he called that press conference up in Cleveland, people expected that he would leave. One thing would be, it was pretty much a sure deal that he would get drafted. There's no certainty that he will win a 3-way battle. However, what he does have going for him right now, he's the only healthy quarterback at Ohio State. J.T. Barrett is going to be limited in the spring. He shouldn't be dismissed in this battle because he finished 5th in the Heisman race and he put up 45 touchdowns before he broke his ankle. He won't be able to run on full speed throughout March and April in those practices. Braxton Miller, with his shoulder, he's not going to be throwing until June or possibly July. So Cardale Jones, he beat the 3 toughest teams on Ohio State's schedule, or 3 of the top 4, rolling through the postseason against Wisconsin and their top 10 defense, Alabama and Oregon. And he has, if you look at it, the most physical tools in terms of playing the quarterback position. He's got the strongest arm. He's impossible to tackle for a lot of guys at 6'5", 250 pounds. But what makes this situation so unique, which I alluded to earlier, Braxton Miller is uniquely gifted as a rusher. J.T. Barrett has great accuracy, makes good decisions. All 3 of them do different things at quarterback, which made Ohio State successful when all of them were out there. I think that Cardale Jones represents the best option